So now what we're going to do, we're going to have a discussion. We're really, really pleased to have Karen coming back and Helen joining us as a trailer for next year's keynote, Helen. And also, I'm hoping at some points we might be able to put some of our online delegates on the screen with us too, so we can see them. And so we're going to be taking some questions from them, perhaps, as well as questions from the room as we have a conversation about the afternoon. So that's what we're going to do. And just before we finish, there are 2 or 3 people in the audience who organize similar events who'd like to try and persuade you to come to their conferences. And we'll turn to them before we go. So that's what we're planning to do. So could I ask the 2 of you to join me on stage?
Manage that. You.
So, always wanted to be a chat show host.
So very happy to satisfy your needs here, Beren.
Life ambition.
Yeah, your life ambition.
I wondered if I could turn to you first, Helen, and just to hear what your thoughts are on how the day has been, what you've heard, what you've experienced.
It's kind of hard to start with thoughts, actually.
Ah, yeah.
And I think what happened in this morning's keynote was so impactful. And I don't know if you know, Karen, I mean, the whole front row was crying. And as we turned and looked back, other people were crying too. And I don't think I've ever been in a keynote that's been quite so impactful, actually. And yet, I think what Karen did a terrific job of doing is touching all of the bases. So we were invited to think, to feel, to reflect, and to know something. And I feel like that's really carried through the day. So the workshops I've been in, including Karen's this morning, it's an incredible kind of open-heartedness, actually, and humility, and people really bringing themselves with humility. And so it's been terrific. What was the question? I'm being a politician. I'm going, I don't know what the question was.
It was,
yeah.
What were your impressions?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, no, you absolutely answered that. And I wondered, Karen, what was your thinking? Like, how did you want, what scene did you want to set for us today? I'm really interested in kind of what your intent was, because you obviously did something, and did you achieve what you set out to do?
Well, I thought that if I'm going to do something like this, it has to be from the heart. It has to, and I have to stretch into sharing what's really important to me, and what matters at this stage of my life. So I guess that's what I did. And at the same time, obviously, there was a lot of me and a lot about my relationship with my father in there. I obviously also wanted to engage people and not alienate anyone, most of all that.
And I think that's that's been carried through into the online workshops, I know, as well. And we've been I just have to remember the number. We've had 26 workshops today. So we've had 14 here, we've had 12 online, with hundreds of people involved in them, all taking as their starting point what you shared and the inspiration of what you shared, Karen. I was in a workshop this afternoon with led by Andriy, who is a Ukrainian soldier, who is a psychologist in the Ukrainian army, really thinking about how does he use TA to support his compatriots to do what they have to do as soldiers, what they're called upon to do to defend their country, but to not be psychologically, or to reduce psychological damage. And I feel like perhaps, I've never thought about using TA essentially to think about how to kill people. you know, that's an extraordinary statement to make, but here we are in the 21st century using TA in this way. And so, you know, I'm kind of curious from both of you, really, and kind of thinking about your conference theme next year, which is about TA in the 21st century, Helen. How do you think we are going to be kind of using TA in new ways? What trends do you see? Where do you meet people using TA in ways that surprise you or interest you? Both. I'm kind of curious if you have any reflections on that. Big question.
Is that to me or to Helen?
Yeah.
I'm really curious, and this does kind of lead into next year's theme. I'm curious about the paradigms that we use to think about TA, and I was thinking more in terms of kind of philosophical paradigms, but you kind of shifted that to practical paradigms as well. And I think, you know, what's amazing about TA is that it never dies. We're all still here, learning the concepts, talking about it, practicing it, taking it out into the world, taking it into workplaces, into education, you know, into consulting field, and to hear that. I think I just feel a bit overwhelmed at the thought that in Kyiv, in Ukraine, someone is having to use it to support his soldiers to do their task. Yeah. So actually, I don't even know how to respond to that. No. But I think there is something about the fact that TA is still here and still with us and growing and changing that I really value. Yes. Its ability to adapt.
Yeah, and inform the task that we're facing.
I think what I'd like to add is that it's actually not TA, it's us. It's the people and what we're doing with those ideas. And I hope what we're doing is adding depth, complexity, as well as making the theories, keeping them accessible so that they don't become mystifying. So anything, I guess, that our colleagues and friends are doing in Ukraine to help them hold on to their minds while they're having to do something which has been inflicted upon them, which feels mindless in some ways. We know there's a legacy and a theory as to why that's happened, but anything that they're doing to keep themselves together and to keep themselves connected, I think is invaluable, really.
Yeah, and a friend today reminded me that our friends and colleagues in Russia are also victims in this, and also are drawn into this against their will. And it was really an important point to make. So thank you, Nicole, for inviting that. I'd like to invite you here and also you online to think if there's anything that you'd like to ask both Helen and Karen, you know, having participated today and been involved in the workshops, been thinking about your own experiences. You know, are you curious to sort of hear further reflection on what you've been experiencing from Karen, from Helen? I'm particularly interested to hear if we might be able to hear and perhaps even see some of the people that are with us online. So does anybody have something that they would like to say as part of this discussion that we're having? Big ask.
So I guess for me today it's been emergence. Like I arrived in one place and I've moved into different spaces, and talking today, I think I was thinking about what is it for me that is so important? What do I mean about how am I political? What is it? What's at the bottom of it? And what emerged out of that conversation was, for me, it's about power. And in TA we have I'm okay, you're okay, which is a very small few words means so much. And that when we start talking about power, it's probably born out of our own experience of powerlessness. And when because I noticed that I was feeling in and out of dysregulation. And I think this is something to do with when we start talking about power and powerlessness, it can take us to that place. And when we go to that place of powerlessness, as we talk about power, we then lose contact with self and other. And yeah, it's an idea. I wonder what you think about it.
I think you're asking there's some sort of process you go through, and in the process, the relational gets lost. Is that right? Yeah.
Shall I go? I really like what you've said, Bev, about it, and it really speaks to the idea of splitting. And it's the thing that came up a lot in our workshop this afternoon about when we're frightened of the material, where we might go, and then there's a splitting, and then nobody gets seen and nobody gets met. So I think you're tapping into that feeling of powerlessness actually really speaks to something. So yeah, power doesn't exist without powerlessness. It's like it can only exist because the other is there, in a way. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that when we're up against it and our lives are at stake, it's probably not the time when we start being all relational.
Brilliant.
I think what it's not just that we stop being relational, we lose our capacity to think. We lose contact with ourselves as well as with the other. That's what dysregulation is all about. That's what, the likes of Stephen Porges talk about. When we are outside of our window of tolerance, our capacity to relate and think gets impaired. It's not a coincidence. And so we lose our voice. We can't talk, our thought gets choked up, or we can't breathe. All of those things, those somatic experiences affect our capacity to make meaning and contact. And so we end up really powerless in a very embodied way.
So I think about what Renan said there. I'm thinking about the body, and the personal and the political is the theme. I'm curious about your thoughts about how our politics, or the experience of politics, actually is held in the body as well. Do you have sort of thoughts about that from your work? It is a big question. Yeah.
There's a lot of big questions coming here.
I said it'd be easy, didn't I? I said you just have to say how nice the food was, and yeah, it was all. Yeah.
Back to our dreams.
I'm thinking about what you talked about today, what you were talking about this morning in the workshop about intergenerational trauma being the place in which the embodiment of traumatic experience continues down the generations. That was a great conversation this morning.
So PJ's monitoring the questions that are appearing from our friends who are online. Do you have one that you want to share with us, PJ?
So we've got one from Neil Keenan, who says, Karen's story revealed so many parallels with the stories of my family members, yet my family members obtained dramatically different responses to prejudicial treatment than those embodied by Karen. I'd like to hear from Karen what influences led to her resilience and preparedness to fight to effect change.
Thank you, Neil. Great question.
Well, there is something in Steiner's formula about contact and awareness and having good mates when I was a teenager. I had really good mates when I was a teenager. I was in a good gang, and we all went to the demos together. So a little bit how I ended, politics can be fun too, and a sense of coming together for a common cause. And of course, as a teenager, you have that sort of righteous moral high ground as well, which can be maybe a defense, but also helpful. In terms of resilience, sort of going forward in a more mature way, or about 20 years of therapy.
You said something in your workshop, Karen. You said, and then I picked up my pen. And that felt very profound.
Yeah, I think I shared in the workshop that by chance I was reading something from the Daily Mail in 2016, and I rubber banded back to my teenage days. And it was the lead up to Brexit and some of the narrative that was around at that time. And that's when I started to write.
Question from over there. I'm going to bring you the microphone.
Thanks a lot. The discussion earlier made me think about, it almost feels like we are between and betwixt two choices as therapists, or maybe bringing two together. One is undoing past trauma, generational trauma, and the other is undoing the world that currently causes trauma on generations that are yet to come. And I'm just kind of wondering, and I know that you don't know the answers, but how do you relate to that? And is there something that you feel like a more urgent priority in your own practice between these two?
That's a terrific question.
Isn't it?
A really great question. I mean, yeah, that question deserves a round of applause. It was a very good question. And I don't think we should answer it in 2 minutes. And that's not a cop-out. But actually, that was kind of the question that Joe and I were exploring in our workshop this afternoon. What's our task? And how do we expand our task in the consulting room? So, we have people working in other settings, other fields that will be working systemically. Can we do this in the consulting room as clinicians? Yes, we can. I don't quite know how. I don't quite know what it looks like, but I know that we can work with the systemic, the structural. We can work with it, the sociological, the political. There's a way of working it whilst not losing an eye on the clinical task. And I don't quite know what that looks like, but I'm really, really, really willing to explore and find out. And I love your question. So thank you.
I was wondering if it's possible for me not to, because I think when you're interested in something and something's on your radar and you're curious, it will come into the work. And this isn't about how we cast our vote in the ballot box or anything like that. It's just about having an eye for it. And certainly I've encountered folks today that really have their eye on this and that are really reflecting on this in quite a deep way.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I really agree with you. And I think if we've noticed it, it's already in the room. And once it's in the room, we will do something with it, but we have to notice it. So, but once we've noticed it, it's there.
Thank you. Great answers to a great question, or responses perhaps. We have a question from the online, and then I'll come to you, Ronan. So again, from you, PJ.
So Richard Stevenson, who is one of our online workshop presenters this morning, asks, what could TA do to assist more people of colour to engage in therapy and training consciously and unconsciously?
Another great question. Come on, dig deep.
Well, I think one of the things, because this is a massive question and obviously one that is very close to my heart, one of the things that I believe we're doing is really looking at how we support people through training and how we qualify people, how we examine them, how we assess them, and how we keep folks engaged. And I know that one of the big things that's going on now in UKCP and amongst training institutes is really exploring how we can decolonize the curriculum. And it's a big thing, and one that we need ambassadors who understand that to really have their input.
Thank you. I would like to acknowledge Richard, who's just at the bottom of our screen. We can see your forehead, Richard. I don't know if you can give us a wave.
Yeah, show
There
it.
he is. Yeah. But Richard did his workshop from his hospital bed. That's how dedicated Richard has been. So a round of applause for Richard, I think. So yeah, very grateful to you, Richard, for your support of the conference. Thank you. Ronan, you had another question.
It's not a question, but more a response to your question that I think we're circling around, and I would like to offer a thought that hope is a radical act. And I think our work, if we hold to hope, we are fighting the oppressive hopelessness.
Thank you, Beren. Do we have anybody else who would like to offer a reflection or ask a question on this quite intense topic? John.
Thank you. I'm taking permission to say this from what you said, Helen. You said if you've noticed it, it's already in the room. So I've noticed it. I'm going to name it. What I remember from what you said, Helen, and what I remember from what you said, Karen, two things. You, Helen, said, the thing about TA is it never dies. And you said, Karen, it's not TA, it's us. Now, I've put those two remarks together, and I might be making 7.5 out of 2 + 2, but I don't think so, because we had a brilliant question from over there, and Rowland just said what he said about hope. It's not in the theory. The theory helps. It's in us. It's in you. It's in our community. We could call it hope. We could call it a number of other things, but it's something that we embody and hold and won't let go of. It's great to be part of it.
Thank you, John. And I think the sort of spirit that you're reflecting, John, is the culture that our conference committee really holds, is that we every year we try to create a sense of community for a day where we can come together and talk like this and think like this and feel a sense of hope and feel renewed in our work by the kind of conversations and inputs we have from one another.
I just want to say you really do, because anything that could have caused me stress about doing the keynote, and it could have been plenty, especially videos and songs and blah, blah. PJ was a star.
Oh, yes. Round of applause for PJ.
But but also every single person that was in email contact. Alison, all of you, you've just all been fabulous, really.
Thank you.
I really do mean that.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
And obviously I echo that.
Thank you. And I know we accept that stroke and work hard all year to get it. And also, I think every single person who comes to the conference also makes it, on the day. So want to thank you all for the spirit with which you've engaged in today. We're going to be bringing things to a close now. Thank you for putting yourself in front of these issues and these questions. So a round of applause for Helen and Karen.